again and welcome back. If you're just joining us, a huge warm welcome. You are in the Europe, Middle East and Africa zone of the Singapore FinTech Festival 2020. My name's Manisha Tank. It's great to have you with us. So much coming out this week as part of the FinTech Festival. We had a great day yesterday with the Economic Summit, and today it's all about infrastructure. Speaking of which, digital infrastructure has been a huge talking point. Of course, all of these FinTech products and innovations wouldn't work without it. So in the next session, this is something that we are focusing on with a real spotlight and very keenly, because we have one of our spotlight guests. I will be moderating a fireside chat with none other than Nandan Nilekani, who is the chairman and founder of Infosys. He is someone who is also the chairman of Step, which is a non-profit technology-based platform, which is there to improve basic literacy and numeracy for millions of children. You can only imagine the scale of the work to be done, but scale has never scared Nandan at all, and we will hear a little bit about that. So we'll get some more insights from him on how private innovators and public infrastructure owners are competing. They're competing to reshape India. Can we change that word from compete to collaboration? Let's find out. That will be coming soon. And of course, the rest of the world. What is his position on the rest of the world? Can we see a rollout of some of the initiatives that he has been at the forefront of in India in other places? Now, after that session with Nandan, we will immediately go to the Block Show segment of the event. And the Block Show host is Gabrielle Yang, who will take you through 2 sessions covering topics on digital money. That's where a lot of literacy needs to be encouraged and education needs to be done. But also central bank digital currencies. This has been a huge talking point here at the FinTech Festival. And stable coins. What does it all mean? What are the prospects? What are some of the what's the great work that's been going on behind the scenes? He will be here with all of that. And I will rejoin you again right here after all of that. But without further ado, hopefully we have Nandan willing and waiting. Let's invite Nandan Nilekani, who is the former co-chairman at Infosys, to join me in this fireside chat.
Hi, Manisha. Good to join you on this program.
It's wonderful to talk to you, Nandan, as well. You know, when was it we met? I think it was 2007, and we met at Davos in Switzerland. Of course, it was the World Economic Forum. And I remember having the opportunity to talk to you about some of your hopes and dreams way back then. And you have achieved so much in the meantime. I would love to say it was all streaming from that meeting that we had, but it's all coming from your brain and your genius. For those people around the world who are watching this right now, who've been hiding under a rock, why don't you update us on some of your favorite achievements in those years?
Well, Manisha, when I met you, I was still at Infosys, which I was one of the co-founders under the leadership of Mr. Narayan Murthy, and I worked there for close to 30 years. And I was also the CEO, I think, when we met. But in 2009, the then Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, invited me to join the Indian Union government in the rank of a cabinet minister to implement a very important project, which was to give every Indian resident a digital ID. And this was something, it was a huge task. And this is something I'd written about in my book, Imagining India. So I said, let me go and walk the talk of what I had said. So I took up this job. I retired from Infosys and worked in the government for about 5 years. And in that time, we built this massive biometric digital ID platform. And when I stepped down in 2014, there were about 600 million people on the platform. And now it has 1.26 billion people. And this platform is fundamental to giving a digital identity to every Indian resident. And also it's linked to the banking system. So it's critical for financial inclusion, bank account opening, and direct benefit transfer into people's accounts. So this has been a huge platform which has been around now for 10 years. So that was one of the things I did when I was in the government.
Yeah, you certainly didn't hang around, did you? And I think one of the things that we've seen come to fruition this year over the course of the pandemic is how some of those systems, that infrastructure has been leveraged to help people during the pandemic, getting payments to people, getting money to people. We saw so many headlines and so many pictures that came from India that were heartbreaking of how people were affected by this pandemic. Perhaps just run through the successes that we've seen this year as a result of that infrastructure that you have been at the forefront of building.
Well, I think this infrastructure was very critical in the pandemic, and the government, which has been a big supporter of this infrastructure, put it to excellent use because they had to get small cash amounts to hundreds and millions of people, farmers and people who were out of a job, other vulnerable people. And because they had this system, which has more than 700 million bank accounts, it has 1.2 billion IDs called Aadhaar, they were able to electronically transfer money directly into these bank accounts within 24 hours. And this is very important because people really needed the money very fast. And the fact that the government was able to transfer money immediately into people's accounts to help them with the crisis was very, very important part of the safety net that was there. And there was another application which was also using the Aadhaar ID uh, idea, which was an Aadhaar enabled payment system where anyone with a smartphone and a biometric device could function as a business correspondent. And if I was in a village and I received money into my bank account, I could go to my BC, do a biometric authentication, and withdraw money from my bank account. So this was very, very popular. And in the months of, I think, April and May, this system alone did 200 million transactions, both inquiry and withdrawal. So all this infrastructure which the government had enabled was extremely critical, extremely handy, and played a big role in the social safety net immediately after the pandemic.
You know, Nandan, a long time ago, I was an economics student, and economics is all about resource allocation at its most basic level, right? One of the big talking points this year has been a vaccine for COVID-19. I don't know if anyone's coined the phrase vaccinomics yet, but when it comes to this, you said recently in the Economic Times in an interview, 2.6 billion doses of intramuscular vaccines in 2 years is an extraordinarily complex and sophisticated task. And without digital orchestration, I do not see how it could be done. So how do we use this infrastructure?
Well, I think my point was that if we could, it took us 6 years in India to give a billion people an ID. And here, we have to give 2.6 billion doses in 2 years. So obviously, and it's a more complicated task of actually injecting something into people. So I think it's actually a more complicated and more sophisticated challenge than Aadhaar was. And in my view, it requires digital orchestration, which allows you to rapidly open vaccination centers anywhere where every vaccinator is certified, where everybody who gets vaccinated gets a digital vaccination certificate, which says who, who, who vaccinated him, when he was vaccinated, which vaccine was used. You need a real-time feedback system to catch any vaccine side effects. The digital certificate should be authenticatable because you want to make sure it's real. And I should use my digital certificate to go anywhere and board a plane or board a bus or get into a restaurant. So, you need to think through all these things. And also, we need to be incredibly agile because we don't know which vaccines will work. We don't know how many doses they are required. We don't know how long their immunity is. And if, for example, a new vaccine comes, which is very good, we have to quickly put that and train everybody to deploy it. On the other hand, if there's a vaccine that doesn't perform and has unexpected and unacceptable side effects, then we should be able to withdraw it very quickly. So all this agility that is required can only be done by a digital orchestration mechanism.
Yeah,
and Aadhaar is part of that because you want to make sure that a person is the person getting the benefit, and therefore you would use an Aadhaar online authentication to verify him.
absolutely. And I've heard you in previous interviews talk about your why for doing all of this. And it is about rising to India's challenges. It's about, helping your fellow citizen and coming up with innovative ideas of how you do that. So as you talk about this digital orchestration and the vaccines, the next thought that comes to my mind is, well, how? Because, you're obviously talking about government there, you're talking about the public sector, but you do need the help of the private sector. So let's pull in this element of it now. How do you get people to work well together?
Well, I think that's why the digital orchestration is important because this is really a team effort. Everybody has to pitch in. It'll have to be government hospitals, government employees, private hospitals, doctors, nurses, you name it. And the best way to bring them all together is that they all are on the same digital platform. So whether I get vaccinated in a government hospital or a government clinic, or whether I get vaccinated in my office, I should get the same digital certificate. I must get the same quality of treatment, and that's what you can enforce using these kind of standards. And therefore, what I'm suggesting really is a way of seamlessly using vaccination by public servants as well as by private players. And I'm also assuming that the government will not be able to fund vaccinations for everybody. So I believe there should be a variety of payment models, some obviously for the poor and vulnerable paid by the government, some paid by individuals themselves when they can afford it, some paid by employers, and some paid by philanthropists and foundations. So you need to have flexibility of payment also, because you need to scale this up to 10 million vaccinations a day if this is going to be successful and if you're going to get to the bottom of this within a year or two.
Of course. And, we just talked about how, as in the people involved, the agencies involved. Now I want to talk about the how, just literally in terms of networks, and move forward, not just about vaccines. Let's talk about wider infrastructure. Where do we stand in India? Because we've seen things happen in India that we have not seen in other countries, even developed countries where we perhaps expected digitalization, we expected infrastructure to move a lot faster. What has India got that others did not see?
No, I think India is always, the Indian political system and the government has always been very supportive of technology. And certainly in the last 5 years since Prime Minister Modi came, he is someone who understands technology very well and gets to how to solve social problems with technology. And therefore, over the last 10 years, we have built a number of large systems. One is, of course, Aadhaar, which has 1.26 billion people on it, does a billion authentications a month, and is used to do a KYC to open a bank account, get a mobile connection, or whatever. Another very important thing, and relevant to this conference, is the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface. Again, a remarkably state-of-the-art payment system designed by NPCI, the National Payment Corporation of India, to which I'm an advisor. And that last month did 2 billion transactions a month. And now we also have a thing called account aggregator, which allows people to use the data, use their own data. It's empowering people with their own data. And I think we have a very positive confluence of events. We have a government which is very proactive about the use of technology. We have a society which embraces technology and is willing to use the new things that come about. You've seen that with smartphones and video and all that. And I think because of the fact that India has historically been a technology country where we had companies like Infosys and others having built the world systems, we have a lot of very good technologists in the government and outside who are willing to help out to build these platforms. So the combination of all this has enabled this successful thing to happen.
Nandanai, let's do a little bit of a history lesson. Let's go back during the Cold War. And that was a time when Pandit Nehru was at the forefront of what they called the Bandung Conference. This was sending the best of India out to places in Africa, for example, and helping with things like agricultural economy. Here we are in a situation where India has achieved so much when it comes to the digital infrastructure and can take those ideas to other countries, to places in Asia, places in Africa. But we are still dealing with a scenario where there are places that have a lack of electricity, a lack of mobile phone signals, there are spotty signals. How do you deal with those sorts of challenges? Are you willing and able to assist in a global rollout of some of these ideas that you've been at the forefront of?
No, oh, absolutely. For example, on digital ID, learning from the Aadhaar experience and other digital national ID programs, the World Bank has a program called ID for D, ID for Development, and they have a global program and they work with multiple countries to implement an ID system built on the same principles. Similarly, UPI, other countries are looking at UPI. So I think it's very much part of it. And the Indian government is also very keen that they take India's technological advancements and offer them to other countries. In fact, sometime about 10 days from now, I am actually attending a conference on education for Africa, organized by the World Bank, which is to talk about some of the lessons in education to Africa. So absolutely, I think both the Indian government and certainly me individually, I'm not a part of the government, would be more than willing to contribute our ideas to any country that wants to take it forward.
I know that you, Nandan, speak to central bank governors. You speak to lots of people all the time. I know that you keep very informed through your conversations, your engagements with people. But when you speak to central bank governors, particularly in countries like that, what sort of concerns do they come to you with when they're talking about the idea of all of this aggregated data and then their own population's fears over privacy or security?
Well, I think central bank governors have to strike a fine path. On the one hand, they are responsible for the safety and security of the financial system to make sure that the whole banking system is robust, it's rigorous, that risk management is done, that loans don't go bad, and all the other concerns that central bankers have. And at the same time, they need to promote innovation, allow people to use payments from their phones, introduce new kinds of like central bank digital currencies. So central bankers have to strike a fine line between regulation for sound financial systems and constant innovation. And I think certainly the Reserve Bank of India and the Singapore Monetary Authority have demonstrated this ability to draw that balance between strong and robust regulation, at the same time allowing calibrated innovation to happen so that people have access to the best financial services. So I think that's what central bankers have to do. And I'm sure I've met many of them, and they're all very, very articulate, very smart, very thoughtful. I'm sure they'll find the right balance between regulation and innovation.
Well, I'm certainly, if you're helping them, I'm sure they will get somewhere with it. But with that, there is, as you say, there's a huge opportunity if this does happen in other parts of the world. And it brings me to a piece of research that came out last year from the World Economic Forum showing that developing economies that adopt digital ID systems rather than paper-based systems, they have the potential to grow their annual GDP by up to 13% by the year 2030. Obviously, that's a very enticing figure. I'm just thinking that with small and medium-sized enterprises being such a large component of GDP, there's a huge opportunity here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. For example, if you look at the account aggregator data empowerment architecture that India has announced, it is fundamentally meant for individuals and small businesses to get better access to credit. India has a GDP, has only a 50% debt to GDP ratios. It has a long way to go in terms of giving credit. But at the same time, many small businesses don't get access because they're not able to supply the information to let the banks make an assessment of their credit worthiness. And now with the account aggregator, a small business that is selling and paying GST, which is our national indirect tax, can actually use that data of invoices and tax payments and give it to a lender. And he can say this data is real data coming from the government and use that to get credit. So essentially, all these things will democratize access to financial services, access to credit. And you're absolutely right. If millions of small businesses get better access to financial services, it will be a big push to the economy.
Certainly, and here in Singapore, we had this announcement earlier this week from Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat about the new system here in Singapore, which will involve a number of banks. But that's part of it, isn't it? You've got to make sure that you get all of those different elements of the financial services industry and all the different agencies involved in it. You've got to get them all on board. So there is that element there, isn't there, that has to be done, the coordination.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the central bank regulator like MAS or RBI has a role to play. I know that Singapore, they've just announced new licenses for digital banks. India has a concept called small finance banks, and there have been some very, very successful small finance banks. Recently, a Singapore bank, DBS, took over an Indian bank, which was in had financial issues. So I think in both places, we have very proactive regulators who want to create a diverse set of actors in the financial space. At the same time, do this balancing between regulation and innovation.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to deny that it's all very exciting, but of course there is this big debate at the moment about data nationalization, so being nationalistic when it comes to the data, making sure that there are open and free-flowing conversations about how this conversation evolves. How would you like it to go? Let's just project forwards a little bit, because obviously there are those who would just say, look, this should be simple, we should sit down, we should talk about it, we should figure this out. But it's not so simple, surely.
Well, I think, I think the broader issue, Manisha, is that now with digital becoming so important to our lives and COVID has accelerated that trend, how we deal with technology, how we deal with data, how we deal with information is becoming so super critical to countries. And therefore, every country will have its own view on data, it will have its own view on privacy, it will have its own view on what is the level of surveillance or what or non-surveillance that is going to happen. So I think we are entering a world where countries will increasingly have a different view, and therefore we can expect that the internet globally will sort of splinter into different versions. For example, the one in China and one in the US and maybe elsewhere. So I think it's just the technology has become so important to our lives that we can't walk away from its other implications. I mean, we are seeing the impact of social media, the impact of fake news, polarization of people, and so on, elections. So I think really technology has come front and center, and it has to become part of the debate everywhere, including about data.
But you know, Nathan, just doing a history lesson again, and I'm thinking about, again, during the Cold War, when the realization came about that if we all, nuke one another, that's mutually assured destruction. We shouldn't see that happen. It's perhaps a distant metaphor, but I want to know, how do you feel about the fact that we may end up with these different pots when it comes to the data? Wouldn't you like to see a world in which it's just an international approach, a multilateral approach?
Well, I think countries have a concern. The concern is that if their data is somewhere else, then if they're cut off from that data, then they can't operate. I mean, the point, Panisha, is that technology has become the lifeblood of today's societies, and therefore governments do want to balance sovereignty with international movement. And so these are all legitimate conversations that everybody has to have.
They certainly are. But I'm just going to push you a little bit more on this one. You speak to a lot of people all the time. Do you think that there can be consensus on the basics, on the basic expectations, on the basic rights or whatever consumers should have, particularly since we're also working on education and literacy, and more people are going to understand data, they're going to have worries, but there must be some basics that we can all agree on.
Well, I think broadly people would agree that people's data is, they should have access to it. I mean, the general thinking now is that if I'm going to generate data in my digital interactions, I should have access to it. The problem has been how. How do you make sure that everybody has access to their own data? Which is why the if you think of the big three things in India, well, one was the Aadhaar ID system, the second was the payment system with UPI, the third was the data empowerment system. And that is really what people are looking for. Even in Europe now, they're talking about data empowerment, where people are able to use their own data. Because once we are going to be so digital in our lives, every action we take will create a digital footprint, digital byproduct. And therefore, how that is, where it is, how it's put to use, how do I benefit from it, all that, those are very, very, how data is handled is really one of the profound questions of this century.
It really is. And there are Netflix documentaries out there, for example, which deal with data. Who's got data on you and how much of it do they have? So this is a conversation that's very much in the public domain, as you say. You say it's going to be the conversation of this century. Earlier, you spoke about education and literacy. How do we encourage education and literacy around this particular subject?
Well, I think we need to do more on this. I think people, when you think about the big challenges in the world today, one is clearly the immediate one is the pandemic, dealing with COVID, getting vaccinated, and coming out of it. So that's one big challenge. And while we may get out of it in the next year or two, there could be another pandemic which comes a few years down the road. So we need to think about. So health has become a very fundamental strategic issue for the world. The second is climate change. How do we deal with climate change and carbon and so on? The third big issue is how do we deal with social media and its consequences? So I think that's something which all of us have to work on right now, and I think all of us have to figure out ways to deal with it, which allow us to continue to do well.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned social media there, and I find that quite interesting because we never thought that we would see WeChat, for example, become a system where you could pay for your lunch. So, and then, I wonder, are we going to see more fusion of all of these sorts of services all into one domain? Is that on the horizon?
Well, I mean, one option is the super app, as you said, and WeChat is a great example of a super app. But the other option is that you sort of bundle different things together. For example, in the Indian model, UPI is the payment system, and UPI is available in Google Pay, it's available in WhatsApp Pay, it's available in Phone Pay, Amazon Pay, Apple Pay, whatever. So there are 6, 7 applications, all of which allow you to do seamless payments, but below the hood, they use a common payment rail. So one way to think about it is that the state, the regulator allows this payment rail to evolve and then allows innovation to happen by different distribution platforms. So that's also, in fact, that creates more competition and more innovation.
Yeah, and I suppose, more innovation, more competition is good for all of us. On that note, where we need to see a lot of innovation, of course, is in green finance, in the sustainability, in meeting those SDG goals by 2030. What's your vision for achieving those goals?
No, I think we actually have to double down now because, in some sense, the COVID and its implications on the poor has actually put us backward because it has put a lot more people into poverty and all that. So what we had a 10-year horizon of what we had to do, but now we have to do whatever we lost, which may be 2, 3, 4 years of loss. So we actually have to do 14 years of work in the next 10 years. And so I think that's super important, which is why one of the ideas that we have been talking about is what we call as societal platforms, which is using the power of digital and platforms to tackle large social challenges like education, health, and so on, and designing them in a way that we get scale, speed, and sustainability. So absolutely, we have to use digital to solve this too.
Can you share any more information about some of those platforms and how they might work?
Yeah, sure. One example is, what we do in education. We have a foundation which my wife and I have set up called EkStep along with Shankar Marwada. And that has built an open source platform called Sunbird. And many of the components of that are used inside a government program called Diksha. And that is now reaching millions of teachers across India during the pandemic. So this is a good example of leveraging technology, but to work on social issues of literacy and numeracy and so on. And we can do the same in health. The government in India has a national health stack, which is going to create an electronic health record system for everybody. And the vaccination record will also be, a digital record. So I think, we're going to see in education, health, skills, jobs, we'll see technology being used much more apart just from financial services.
Yeah, actually, I have checked out the website. It's fantastic. The work is just excellent, and I encourage everyone who might be watching this right now to go and have a look at the work that your wife has been doing and also that you have been doing as well. Let's talk now, just pivot to the wider world, and I really just want to get an idea of some of the things that you're excited about. I was reading an article recently, and I think you did a presentation on this, about how you felt that the future of fintech was French. What was that all about?
Well, it was there was an event in Bangalore with the French government. And so, France has always been a leader. I mean, sometimes we forget that before the internet was there, the French had a system called Minitel, which was the internet before the internet. And they actually popularized the idea of people using these devices, sending emails and so on. So the French also have been very advanced in areas like smart cards and biometrics and so on. So I was just pointing out that, the future is about every country's strengths being put to work for the future of society.
I know that some time ago you set up a fund and you set up a investment fund in startups. But extrapolate, let's just jump out of India now. Where are you seeing the most exciting, onboarding of startups in the world?
Well, I think it's quite fascinating. Obviously, the Silicon Valley is there, India is there, but Israel is there. Infosys has a startup that we purchased in Israel, which is doing very well. Singapore has become a big hub for the region, and we're seeing a lot of exciting things happening there. So I think the good news is that startups are now not limited to one region, but they're happening all over the world. And I think we are very excited by the possibilities around the world. At Infosys, we actually invest and keep in touch with startups around the world because we have global clients who also want to get a window into what's happening in the startup world. And we facilitate them getting a chance to see what's coming up.
And what's particularly notable, actually, is that it isn't just people who are IIT grads or something like that. These are people in their own communities who've wanted to address a problem or a challenge. But now, thanks to digital infrastructure, they've been able to achieve great things. And it's all from a very low base, even a low cost base. I guess that's very encouraging.
Yes, so what has happened is one is, of course, distribution has become easy as more and more people have smartphones. The cloud has made it easy for you to buy computing capacity and storage capacity with your credit card. Software tools have become simple to develop applications very quickly. Digital advertising allows you to advertise on the web. So I think fundamentally we have reduced barrier of entry to many of the things that you normally had to start a business. Therefore, starting a business is becoming much easier. However, because it's easier for everyone, the competition is also much more. And therefore, how do you break out of the pack and become a unique player? That's really the challenge for most startups.
It certainly is, but it's always been challenging. Business has been challenging in previous years, for women in particular. Let's talk about inclusivity and how digital infrastructure helps us get past some of the barriers that restricted us before. What are the most exciting things for you that you see on the horizon on that front?
No, I think we're seeing a lot of women now in technology. Certainly, in all the companies, a significant part of the employees now are women. In many of the engineering colleges, the majority of students now are women. So I think there's a big shift there. I think the challenge is that it thins out as we go up in the organizational ladder, and there are less women at senior levels. So I think certainly one of the things we need to do is to make sure that we create pathways for women to rise to senior levels in corporations. And at the same time, I think make sure that we have enough women become entrepreneurs. And that is something that I'm saying today. Today in India, I do see a lot of very good young women entrepreneurs who have enormous zeal and zest to be successful. So, but we all have to be conscious of this, and we have to become much more diverse and much more inclusive in creating entrepreneurs around the world.
I love that you raised this point about them not getting to the more senior managerial roles. Obviously, you were at the helm of Infosys for a long time, and I'm sure that you have lots of ideas on leadership and management when it comes to these sorts of things. But I wonder, over the last year with the pandemic, we've all had to work in a much more flexible way, many of us working from home. I'm assuming that you're working from home at the moment. That's where you are. Okay, there you go.
Last 8 months.
Well, there you go. And that has been the experience of many across the world. But for women in particular, suddenly it has been a complete shift in working. You don't have to be outside the home where, there might be demands on your time at home, but many have welcomed the more flexible working. Has there been a shift change, do you feel, over this pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I think, now with working from home, we believe that even when things get back to normal, maybe even a third of our people on any given day will be working from home. And it's much more flexible. People can choose their own time. In fact, when you're working with clients around the world, somebody sitting in San Francisco or in Sydney or Tokyo, you can actually choose the times when you talk to them. So I think this added flexibility will actually allow women to be in the workforce. They can work part-time, they can work from home. So I think the complete global mindset change on working from home is actually very, very good for encouraging diversity.
So, Nandan, now I need you to do some crystal ball gazing, and I want you to tell us, what are the big things that you're thinking about? We know we've dealt with climate change, we've talked about the environment, but you're nonstop. I don't think you ever stop. I'm sure you're always thinking about what is the next big challenge, what is the next problem you can solve. What is it?
Well, I think, the big challenge on the business side is we have thousands of companies that are now trying to completely reinvent themselves digitally, go from their legacy systems to become agile and use the cloud. So to me, that's a big thing that's going to drive on the business side. And on the social side, it's really leveraging the power of societal platforms to make a big dent and move the needle on the big goals that we have in the next 10 years. So I think both on the business side and on the social side, I see technology as a very important and strategic lever to achieve the goals that we want of a better society.
You know, I heard during our leadership series here at the Singapore FinTech Festival today, someone say that he sensed, and this was a CEO, he said, I sense that there's going to be more partnership, there's going to be more collaboration. Isn't this really at the heart of what needs to happen now?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are seeing, amazing partnerships. We have, Glaxo and Sanofi coming together to make the vaccine, and we have Apple and Google working together to do the contact tracing app. So suddenly we find partners are coming around, and people whom you thought as competitors are now working together. So what I think this crisis has shown is that if we really have to solve things at speed and scale, it has to be collaboration. I mean, governments around the world are taking huge risks and pre-ordering vaccines even before they are approved. These are all things we have not seen before, which is why a normal process of vaccine that takes years will happen in less than 1 year. So I think this shows that if we are willing to collaborate, we are willing to trust each other, we are willing to work in the spirit of partnership, we can move the needle in many, many ways. So I think that's a big lesson from the pandemic.
Yeah, you used the word trust. That has also come up in conversations today. The fact that trust is going to be a big part of the conversations between regulators and banks, for example, but trust is also going to be a big part of the rollout of this infrastructure that we've been talking about. You had to surmount some of that. There were plenty of articles, there were plenty of criticisms with Aadhaar when it first came out because not everybody understood it at the beginning. Are we going to have to go through that in other countries and as we scale up these initiatives?
Sure. Look, I think, we are seeing that technology, while technology is neutral, the use of it can be, either abused or used. I mean, social media is one example of the challenges we find. I think privacy is a legitimate concern. Cybersecurity is a huge concern because the more we rely on technology, the more we are vulnerable to a cyber attack. AI is a very powerful thing, but AI also can lead to bias and lack of explainability. So I think we have to navigate through all this. But overall, I'm still a big believer that if we're going to solve the big challenges of the world today, and we have seen this in the last 12 years, it's because of the efforts of technologists and scientists that we have moved so fast. So clearly, these are the instruments we have to make the world a better place.
So, Nandan, I'm not suggesting that we should clone you and make sure there are more of you, but we definitely need more of the people that you have worked with and more of the people who can actually roll out and execute many of these great ideas that you've had. Talent's been a big problem, hasn't it? And the world's got quite a bit of catching up to do. Again, you must have experienced this at Infosys. How are we going to get there, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity? Because we need more people who can be the good guys.
No, I think definitely, and a lot of work which we do at Infosys, for example, is about leadership development. We have a very, very progressive leadership planning and make sure that everyone gets opportunities to grow, to do new roles, and so on. So leadership coaching, leadership development is something which I take very, very seriously. But on cyber, it's partly, of course, having more people. It's also about building better platforms, maybe using AI, and maybe using that to anticipate where the risks are coming and staying one step ahead of the guys who are trying to break it down. So I think cyber is a combination of technology, AI, and great people.
Speaking of people, I want to talk about someone who's often in the headlines, Elon Musk. And of course, he has this big plan for this satellite-driven global Wi-Fi network. I was really keen, and we just have a couple of minutes left, to get your views on these sorts of innovations. Is that the kind of thing that's going to just change the world?
No, I think Elon Musk is an extraordinary entrepreneur. He's revolutionized the electric car business. He's built a private space company, which is extraordinary. And now he's talking about these. My only concern with this is that then we can't see the sky. We're only going to see his satellites. But I think it is definitely broadband internet is something which he is planning to do with satellites. It's been tried before, right from Iridium and so on. But this time, I think the economics will be right. And it will have a big impact on the global broadband internet.
Just finally, any last word really on how you're feeling about 2021? I hope the word is going to be optimistic. It's been a tough 2020. What are you hoping for in the coming year?
Well, I feel that, we have managed this for the last 8 months, and now the vaccine has come, the cavalry has arrived. And I'm hopeful that in the next few months will be much better. I have got an invitation from Thurman to come to Singapore in June, and I hope to do that physically. I'm really looking forward to getting out in 2021.
Well, what a great place to end our conversation, to know that hopefully you'll be coming to visit us all in Singapore sometime very soon. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure, and wonderful to reconnect with you after many, many years. Mr. Nandan
Thank you,
Nilekani.
Manisha. It's wonderful.
Thank you from all of us.
Thank you.
Our huge thanks to Nandan Nilekani. Over to Gabriel Young.
Hi, thank you, Manisha. Great session, and I think we'll be welcoming you back very, very shortly. For everybody still with us right now, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Gabriel, as Manisha has already introduced, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so as we move on into the SFF blog show series right now. Well, hello again, and for those of you who have just joined us, hope you're getting comfortable wherever you are right now. Well, hello again, and thank you everybody for joining us.